Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening and welcome. My name is Julia Smith, and I'm the director of the Sexuality Series here at Calvin College. Sexuality Series is our programming that goes alongside the curriculum on topics of sexuality, relationships, and gender from a Christian perspective. And we aim to promote safety, inclusion, chastity, justice, and respectful dialogue on a range of topics. We have a variety of upcoming events that you may have seen on the screen behind me. So next week, Thursday, we have Leanne Simon and Megan DeFranza, who will be speaking about intersex and the image of God. Then in November, we have 3 events put on by the Sexual Assault Prevention Team. In January, we have a couple of films about gender, both masculine and feminine. And then in April, another event that we have is Eve Tushnet, who is going to be speaking about celibacy in the church. So lots to look forward to. And I would like to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event: the English Department, Psychology, Gender Studies, Campus Ministries, the Bruni Counseling Center, Saga, and Residence Life. So following Jeff's talk tonight, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A, which will be hosted by Karen Soppe from the English Department. And you will have received a question card on your way in. So during the course of the night, if you have a question, just write it on that card, and at the appropriate time for Q&A, then some of the ushers will be collecting those up and down the side aisles. Oh, and the second card that you received is our evaluation. We really appreciate if you can fill that one out and leave it at the door as you exit. Thank you. So one of the things that I love about Jeff Chu is the honesty and respect that he brings. Jeff seeks to listen to and understand others, even if that other is Fred Phelps of Westboro Baptist, as Jeff talks about in his book. Jeff is gifted as a writer and gatherer of stories, and he's traveled more widely and more intentionally than perhaps any other writer to interview a range of people on topics of LGBT and faith. His book, Does Jesus Really Love Me? A Gay Christian's Pilgrimage in Search of God in America, is a fascinating overview of the landscape in the US on LGBT and faith, told through interviews and personal narrative. More recently, Jeff's travels in East Africa have afforded him a window into the lives of LGBT people of faith whose struggles, as we'll hear tonight, can enlarge our vision and our hearts. At a time when many churches view LGBT persons primarily as an issue requiring a statement, Jeff brings a refreshingly different approach. Our mission at Calvin College is to help students to think deeply, act justly, and live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal in the world. That's why we're here tonight. I'm sure we do not all agree in this room about matters of LGBT and faith. But I trust we come genuinely seeking to love God and to love one another, as Jesus has taught us, even amidst different theological approaches, a spectrum of different communities to which we belong, and other diverse aspects of our identities. So as we connect tonight with the pain and complexity of the stories that Jeff brings, I hope we can live more fully into that Calvin College mission and into our Jesus Christ mission: to think, to live, to act, and to love. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Chu.
Thank you so much for the invitation, for the kind introduction, Julia. Just a housekeeping note. I'm going to be showing you some pictures of folks that I met in Uganda and Kenya. I'd be thrilled if you tweet or share about what I'm saying on social media, but please don't tweet any pictures or share any pictures of these individuals. For their safety and for their security, it would not be a good idea for these pictures to be out on the internet. So I just ask for your help with that. Let's open with a word of prayer. God of hope, what is going on in our world? Where are you? And what are we doing? Be with us tonight. We need your wisdom, and we look to you to do all that we cannot. Give us humility and openness. Break down our pride and replace it with grace. Transform our fear into trust. Stir a renewed awareness of our shortcomings and your sufficiency. Point us toward the fulfillment of your promises, promises of love and wholeness, promises of reconciliation and justice. In the name of the Christ, who in his life and death and resurrection embodied this hope and your love. Amen. So I want to introduce you to a man I met in July in Uganda. His name is Moses. He lives in a slum in Kampala, the capital, and he's the kind of person we like to feel sorry for. He lives alone in a one-room hovel that has no indoor plumbing. He fetches water from the well down the hill and shares a pit latrine with his neighbors. The electricity is only on between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m., and everything he owns, including the lumpy mattress on which he sleeps, is arrayed on the floor, which is covered by a stained blue carpet. I suppose you could say his hovel has a bathroom, which you have to understand literally. It's the corner where he takes his bucket of hot water and pours it over himself to bathe. I suppose you could also say that his hovel has a kitchen. It's the corner where his paraffin cook stove sits on the floor, and he uses that to heat water for tea and cooks when he can afford food. Some days Moses looks around his hovel and wonders how life came to be like this. He didn't grow up poor. His family was solidly middle class. His mother was an accountant, his dad was a chef. Whatever your mental images are of life in Uganda, they probably don't accurately reflect his childhood, which was likely not that different from yours or mine. His family, mom, dad, sister, Moses, went to church. Moses told me about their nice house and their car, and the camping trip they once took, and the refrigerator that was always full of food. But after his parents died, his mom when he was in his early teens, his dad when he was 18, just 2 weeks after he finished his high school exams, he and his sister lost all of that. Moses has these slightly sleepy eyes that no matter what he's doing, whether he's telling a happy story or a sad one, gives him the look of a dreamer. When he talks, his eyes tend to drift upward, as if he's constantly looking to the sky for ideas or for inspiration. He doesn't have much else to do. He may love to cook, but most days he can't afford ingredients. Over the past 3 years since Moses lost his job, he has also lost more than 100 pounds. When his friends ask what's going on, he says it's good to lose weight. But he won't tell them how far his fortunes have fallen. I love food, he told me. I think about it all day. I think about meat. I think about matoke. That's a staple that they make from plantains. I think about rice. I think about vegetables. That's what I think about most of the time. When he feels especially sad, he pulls out some old family pictures, which are the only things left that he has from his childhood. I look at my pictures and I cry a bit, and I think about my mom and my dad. I wish they were around, he says. He thinks about the house they had and the car and the camping trip they once took, and of course that refrigerator that was always full of food. It was, he says, a very beautiful life. Today, the only relative he stays in close touch with is a cousin. Twice a week she'll call, Moses says. One day, his cousin tried to set him up with a potential girlfriend. I told her I like white women more, Moses says with a smile. Why, his cousin said, why would you prefer white women? She wouldn't give me a headache, he replied, assuming that she would never be able to find him a white woman to date. Moses doesn't want a girlfriend, he already has a boyfriend. That's why 3 years ago he lost his job as a technician at a photo lab. That's why his sister has disowned him, though she won't tell friends or relatives. because of the shame that it would bring on their family. "You can't be my brother if you're out there saying that you are this," she told him. "When you change and are ready to become a real African person, let me know. Go to church. This is a demon. This isn't real." The thing is, he does go to church. Most Sundays you'll find him at Watoto Church. It's an evangelical megachurch where they sing songs that would be familiar to many of you. He keeps going even though a few years ago, one of the pastors sent around a petition in support of a law proposing the death penalty for some homosexual activity. Moses no longer goes to Bible study, though, not since that all-night prayer service he attended last year, where they were praying for the youth of the nation. One person said, "We should pray that homosexuality doesn't come to our nation." "I just felt out of place," Moses says. Late last year, Moses' boyfriend sold his old laptop, which was one of the only things of value that they owned. They got the equivalent of $55 for it. "We wanted to have Christmas," they told me. Their biggest purchase was 2 live chickens, which cost them about $11 for Christmas dinner. They also bought 55 cents worth of potatoes, 70 cents of green beans, a couple of dollars of bananas to make matoke, and then they splurged. They went to the movies, and they bought a couple of sodas, and within 2 weeks, all that money was gone. One day, Moses told me he hadn't had anything to eat in more than 36 hours. When we arrived at his house, he had been about to make some black tea. Many days, that's all he has, tea with sugar, if he can afford it that day. A little later in the conversation, I remembered that I hadn't asked him his age. That's what you have to do as a journalist, you get the facts. "How old are you?" I said, and he smiled a little. "Today's my 30th birthday." Many LGBTQ people in Uganda turn to sex work to make money. It's not just about discrimination. 80% of Ugandans under the age of 30 are unemployed. There aren't good job prospects for anyone, so what options do you have? Moses says he won't do this. "You have that inner voice," he says. "You're better than that. I thought about it. We're hungry, we have no money, we have no nothing. But I'd prefer to stay the way we are than do that." A couple days later, I took Moses out for breakfast. He said he had something he wanted to tell me. He's never been involved with any of the gay rights organizations in Uganda. He doesn't really have many gay friends other than his boyfriend. But in June, he felt so desperate that he finally reached out to one group for help. A caseworker opened a file, but he said that it was unlikely he could get funds for Moses unless Moses wanted to go to Kenya and declare himself a refugee. Moses didn't want to do that. As frustrated as he was with his situation, Uganda is home. And why should he have to leave the country he loves? Then on June 28th, Moses got a call from someone saying he thought the organization had figured out a way to get him some help. Could he meet in person to discuss? And of course, he went. That night, Moses told me, this alleged caseworker raped him. When he went back to his real caseworker to report this attack, the caseworker's response was, "Well, you shouldn't trust everyone you find." One miracle of Moses' life is that he feels no anger towards God. "I don't doubt God. He protects me and provides for me," Moses said. "I believe God let it happen for a reason. Maybe there's something better for me that I just don't know yet. Life has hills, and maybe you have to live with these to get to your destination." What is this hope? What is this confidence in God that the best, however you define it, is still to come? What is this sense that even when almost everything has been taken away from Moses, that faith can remain? You should know one other thing about Moses. That's not his real name. One evening, I asked him to pick a pseudonym for his own protection. Was there a person in the Bible, perhaps, who had some special meaning for him? He thought about it for a while, and then he said, "How about Moses? I've always liked Moses." He told me he was inspired by the biblical Moses' long journey and how God had picked him to do something great. But as I walked back to my hotel, it struck me. The biblical Moses never entered the promised land. So what do you feel when you hear this snippet of Moses' story? There are a number of reactions that you might have had, possibly even several at once. Is it sadness? Do you feel that sadness blossoming into compassion, a sense of shared sorrow? Do you feel pity? That's a word to me that has a tinge of condescension to it, but I understand if you feel it. Do you wish you could do something to help? Do you feel that what Moses needs is God's conviction, that his life reflects unwise choices? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, especially on that last one. You might not want to say it out loud, but I understand it. I even expect it. I wonder how many of you in hearing Moses' story thought another thing. How many of you in hearing his story thought, I have something to learn from this brother? It wasn't my first thought. I will confess that. But in spending time with him, hungry Moses, thirsty Moses, poor Moses, that is where I ended up. He has something you cannot buy, something that I crave, something that amid my life of comfort I often struggle to obtain, and that is otherworldly hope. I've been thinking a lot about hope lately. And when I reflect on that part of my journey that began in 2010, when I started reporting my book, I realized I was driven largely by a desire to identify what sustains people's faith, but also how they maintain a sense of hope. It's such a nebulous concept, even though hope is a word we so often toss around. We so often talk about faith, and perhaps we talk too much about love, or at least some versions of it. But what about hope? John Calvin, in his commentary on the Psalms, urges us to pray for hope, that God would, quote, increase our hope when it is small, awaken it when it is dormant, confirm it when it is wavering, strengthen it when it is weak, and that he would even raise it up when it is overthrown. I agree. But what are we even talking about when we talk about hope? What is this mysterious thing? What does it mean? I'm a word person, but I struggle to define it. The dictionary tells me that hope is a feeling of expectation and desire, but that to me seems insufficient. The word is layered. There's desire, and there's expectation, and there's optimism and anticipation and belief, and a certain element of trust, but also think about what's not there. I don't think there are any guarantees. I don't think there's certainty. I don't think there are assurances of smooth journeys ahead. That is not the only level on which I struggle with the word and the concept of hope. Many moments in my life I have felt hopeless. I've not been convinced that, to borrow Moses' metaphor of the hills, I will get over those hills that are before me. Many moments I have doubted not only that God has allowed these hills to be put in front of me for a reason, but also that there is a God at all. Many moments I've struggled to believe that there's anyone worth trusting, that anyone is on my side, that my life has worth. Some of you may hear me say those words and think I'm just talking about my gayness and my alienation from faith because of that. Let me be clear, I am not. I've felt hopeless because I've been mocked for my skin color, the shape of my eyes, the texture of my hair. I've felt hopeless because I've been sexually assaulted, and I still struggle to come to terms with the baggage of that experience. I felt hopeless because I work in an industry where I've been marginalized for my faith. I felt hopeless because I am literate and I read the newspaper and I see that we live in a world that's cruel, that says black lives do not matter, that devalues what God has created, that creates hierarchies when there should be level ground, that compels us to have false fronts and fake smiles, especially in church. I felt hopeless because of the evil ways in which people in communities like this one use the technological tools we've been given, hiding behind anonymity to spew messages that devalue and mock other people, as if we do not see your words on Yik Yak. I felt hopeless because my sisters are told their voices are worth less than those of my brothers. Because my sisters have been told they cannot be my sisters. because my sisters are killed for who they are and who God made them. I felt hopeless because life is unfair, and our world seems unjust, and we are still at war in too many places, and too many children have no families and no food. Have you felt any of these things? Any of them? I felt hopeless because I'm human. I felt hopeless because I have felt human. I felt hopeless because I wonder, where is the God who is love? Where is the God of our promises? And where is the God of our dreams? I'm asking you to come alongside me in your humanity now. I'm also asking you to extend me a bit of your grace, because these are new ideas I'm testing publicly for the first time. I'm thinking out loud, and I'm trusting you to hold these ideas delicately and gently. In other words, I'm asking you not to extinguish all my hope that there might be something valid here. Not quite yet. So let's spend some time with some stories and work to imagine what it might mean to cultivate hope at the intersection of all these things. There's that famous line in Walt Whitman's glorious poem, Song of Myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. We all do. And those multitudes, those layers, those feelings, those elements of experience both give us hope and take it away. They make us rich and render us vulnerable. We contain multitudes. We are human. And because of that, we lose hope, and because of that, we need hope. I am not a preacher, and I'm not a pastor. That was my grandfather and my uncle. I'm not a teacher. I see some in this room, and I am not one of them either, nor am I envious of them. I'm a reporter and a writer. So what I have to offer to you tonight isn't my own wisdom, but just a few stories, which I hope will teach us all something about hope. So when I began working on my book in 2010, I was in a pretty bad place. I was back in church, but somewhat reluctantly, and I bet some of you know that feeling. Coming out had been a really torturous process for me. At a wedding, there was the old friend who looked me in the eye and turned and walked in the other direction. I felt like the spring and summer of some of my friendships had turned to fall and winter, except that I didn't know if things would ever warm up or thaw. Early in my year of reporting, I met online a young man named Gideon Eads. It was kind of a miracle to me, really, because I tweeted one day, "Conundrum, how do I find a closeted gay Christian to profile?" And this guy in Kingman, Arizona tweeted me back under a pseudonym. So we corresponded for most of the year that I worked on the reporting of the book, and as he slowly came out, first to online friends, and then to a pastor, and eventually to some people in his community. And at the end of my year of reporting, I went to Arizona to meet him. He took me to this Safeway where he works as a cake decorator. He swore nobody in his life knew that he could possibly be gay, and I was like, hey, you decorate cakes, not to be stereotypical, but... He took me to Kingman, Arizona's largely empty Main Street. He showed me the storefront where he hopes to have his own cake shop someday. He took me into the hills where he escapes when he needs peace and solitude. We drove by his family's house too. And let me read you a little bit of his story as I wrote it in the book. We pass a dull brown ranch-style box squatting on our left in the foothills of the Surbat Mountains. That's my house, he says. My dad built the whole thing. Of course, we can't go in. His mom will be at home, and how would he explain who this random guy is? Anyway, his mom doesn't like having gay people in the house. She has 2 gay relatives who live elsewhere. Gideon says he's actually not sure where. And not too long ago, they came to Kingman to visit. And they stopped by the Eadses one afternoon, and afterward, Gideon says, things were just getting Febrezed and wiped down with bleach right after they left. She walked them out, and then right away, she was using those sanitizing wipes and making snide comments. She'd say things like, you never know what they're doing. She just seemed disgusted. I think she does love them, but just enough to have contact with them and hope they change. It's not the unconditional kind of love, and when my brother got home, he was like, they were in our house? That makes me hesitant to tell them about me, because I don't want them to think about me that way. I'm still the person they grew up with and had fun with and made memories with. So after the book came out, Gideon's family obviously found out. He decided he wanted to use his real name. They were humiliated. His mom learned about his sexuality earlier. She was actually digging around under his bed, who knows why, and found these books about the Bible and homosexuality, and she was like, what's this? But his brother and sister hadn't found out. They were angry too. How could he do something so public that would bring such shame on their family? He sent me an email one day to tell me about their reactions. They told me to enjoy my fame and know that I was mocking God by my actions, he wrote. Then his mom asked him not to show up for their regular Father's Day celebration and told him that he had ruined it for everyone. So one thing struck me about Gideon from the beginning of our correspondence: the grace with which he regarded every single person around him. It was rooted in humility, but also in love, a love that is the closest thing to unconditional that I think I've ever encountered. Later in that same email, he wrote this remarkable paragraph about his family, the same family that has ostracized and ridiculed and excluded him. I wish they could know my unconditional love for them. I wish they could know my true motivations for everything I've done in my life. I think I will always probably be a criminal to them, unless they find a way to open their eyes and somehow look at my life from a different lens. I won't hold my breath. I just hope they know somehow that no matter what's happened, what's been said, what's not been said, or whatever, that I've never stopped loving them and thinking good things about them. They are great people, and they deserve great things. Can I say this about the people in my life who have broken off relationships with me because of how they interpret Romans 1? Can I say this about the people in my life who have condemned me publicly while refusing to engage with me privately? Can I say this about the people in my life who have hurt my feelings in even milder ways? Gideon's one of the most gracious people I've ever met, perhaps the most gracious, and also one of the most hopeful. I wish I could bottle whatever he has in him, because though I aspire to be gracious, I struggle with it daily. And if I could bottle it, I would make so much money. What I have learned from him as we've continued to correspond from time to time is that grace and hope are symbiotic. In receiving God's grace, in his acknowledgement of God's grace, he's filled with grace for those around him. It's a ridiculous, amazing grace, an otherworldly grace. And this otherworldly grace fuels an otherworldly hope. His belief that he has been given by God unmerited favor, that's the definition of grace, right, is directly related to his extension of that unmerited favor to all those around him. And that sunny, incredibly humble vision of the world fuels his belief that tomorrow will be better than today. And that God holds all of us close, closer than we could ever know. Could I say of people who have said terrible things about me, they are great people and they deserve great things? From Gideon, I began to see how grace feeds hope and hope feeds grace. If you believe that our God offers redemption beyond our understanding, how can you feel anything but hopeful? If you believe that the balm that our God provides can soothe all earthly pain, how can you feel anything but hopeful? If you believe in the truth of Romans 8:38 and 39, that nothing past, present, or future, earthly or heavenly, can separate us from the love of God through Jesus, that ultimate act of grace, how can you feel anything but hopeful? If you cultivate grace, might that also somehow feed hope? So here's a little postscript. Gideon's getting married next weekend. That's him on the right. It will be like my own wedding, bittersweet. His family won't be there. But in his most recent message to me, he couldn't stop gushing about his fiancée. They met online and discovered, he told me, that their three greatest passions were the same: Jesus, coffee, and Disney. We've been through the good and the bad, and we keep coming out of every circumstance stronger and with more love. What I love most about him is that whatever brokenness there is with me, him, or us, he loves through it. and we get through it, and we make life better. In Uganda, I found my sense of hope especially challenged. It was the hardest reporting trip of my life. The marginalization goes beyond anything that I've experienced or that Gideon's experienced. I heard stories of discrimination, harassment, and assault that shocked me. And maybe I was just naive. But the problems beyond, the problems facing LGBTQ people in Africa, not just in Uganda, but all across Africa, go well beyond legal problems. We read in the newspaper about laws. The main problems aren't the laws. We fail to recognize the complexity of our human systems if we say it's just legal issues. It's not just the law that's anti-gay. It's that poverty is anti-dignity. It's that corruption is anti-human. It's that people have to hustle to put food on the table because there are no guarantees and there is no safety net. I want to tell you about some other Ugandans I met and what I learned from them about the biology of hope. One of the most fabulous characters I met was a trans woman who goes by the name Princess Rihanna. Yes, that Rihanna. Hope has layers, right? When I asked why Rihanna chose that name, she looked at me like I was insane, as if it needed no explanation. I just love the way she is. Her style, her music, the way she feels what she's singing. Princess Rihanna talked about how in Rihanna's music, she's heard messages of empowerment, but also a story of emergence from loneliness. I don't know if you've heard that, but I haven't. Princess Rihanna has spent months in prison. Last year, she went to jail and was beaten. Her father's been ostracized at church because of who she is. She herself has not been to church since January of 2014. I can't go. They see you, and the pastor will preach things about you. And yet, when I ask her about her relationship to God, she has this to say: God is the one knowing what will happen tomorrow, what will come today, whether I will breathe or not. He's the reason you're here. She thinks back to her arrest, and she confesses some doubt at the time. I thought, oh God, you have left me aside. I thought you were beside me. But she returns again and again to God. Is it because she has nothing else? It feels almost condescending for me to say that. I hope I will not be here for long, she says. I hope for a time when things will change with families and with churches. That is part of my hope. And at her core is God. God is everything, she says. God is first. Then there's Rachel, who left Uganda after her dad beat her and kicked her out of the house for being a lesbian. My brother and stepmother were defending me, she told me. My dad pushed my brother onto my stepmother onto the floor. She was pregnant and she lost the baby. She's now a refugee in Kenya, but Kenya hasn't been much safer. A gay boy and a lesbian girl and I rented a place. A Kenyan pastor asked to borrow some money. He helped us get our house, so that's why we gave it to him. But then later, we didn't have any, so we asked him to give our money back. He said, I'm going to tell people you are gay and lesbian and you are not Kenyan if you tamper with me. He started coming at night with other Kenyan guys, so we felt insecure and we went to another place. Then 36 of our colleagues were arrested, so we had to leave that place. Then there were 4 of us, 2 gays, 2 lesbians. The other lesbian did not dress well, very short skirts. The neighbors started to complain about her. They went and said, what do you think the Ugandans are using this place for? What are they doing? One said, they are gays. And someone told the landlady, they threw us out of the house. The next house we got, it was 2 Kenyans and 3 Ugandans. The Kenyans knew. They blackmailed us, so I had to leave that place. Then a lady was hosting me, and she did not want to host me anymore, so I had to leave that place. And now I'm staying alone. I have no money. I have to get food from my friends. I don't think I ever feel happy. I go to a born-again church. I lie to them. I say I come from Rwanda so they don't think I'm Ugandan. I lie so much. I feel bad so much for the lying. And yet Rachel still goes to church. Why? I asked her. If I wasn't a believer, I would be dead. God helps me. In Nairobi, I also met Raymond, a bisexual man who was one of the funniest characters in my reporting. He has tons of questions. I asked God, why have you created such complicated people? Why is it, God? Why do I bring my father these problems? But he was also, despite the odds, one of the most hopeful people that I met. I just believe God created me for a reason. If it is to change the world, let me be the person to change the world. Why not me? When I pray for the wisdom that Solomon had. We pretend to know, yet we know nothing. I'm still processing these stories. Each time I open my notebooks, I uncover new layers and new questions. But here's what I think right now. When I think about Raymond and Rihanna and Rachel, I think that hope requires humility. Hope requires the recognition that we do not have the resources within us to give us what we not just want, but also need. As I flew back from Uganda, I thought about the people I'd met and how they contrasted so radically with my own stereotypes and my own prejudices. I expected weakness, and instead I found strength. I expected to find despair, and I did find some of that, but I also found great optimism. I expected poverty, and I definitely found that, but I also found wealth of a kind that I did not expect, and that I think I don't have. It's a ridiculous inner wealth. Here I am, living in relative luxury in America. To buy a plane ticket to Uganda costs more than the annual household income of many families in Uganda. It seems almost absurd that I should leave my home and my husband and my comfortable life in New York and expect to find hope in one of the poorest countries in the world. And yet that's what I found. When I returned from Uganda, I began to think about why this is. How is it that these people felt such hope when so often I don't? Is it because the otherworldly hope that Jesus offers comes with no conditions? But I'm so used to a transactional life, to being part of a consumption culture in which everything has a cost. I'm part of this system, and I've forgotten how Jesus actually works. Is it the otherworldly hope, a desperate hope, that drives a woman to touch the hem of Jesus' clothing for healing? Is it otherworldly hope, a wise hope that compels Nicodemus to seek out Jesus in the dark of the night? Is it the relative luxury and comfort of my life, the relative lack of need, that prevents me from reaching out for this otherworldly hope? I think it's a little bit funny that I'm talking about hope at Calvin, not Hope, which is my own denominational college. I am not unaware of your historic rivalry. I actually have a longer personal history with Calvin. My pastor is a Calvin alum. So is one of my closest friends, who is the father of my goddaughters. When I was in high school, I was a part-time accompanist at a CRC church in Miami that was packed with Calvin alums. And my high school, a Christian school, of course, was full of them too. Mr. Zylstra, Mr. Bousma, Mr. Admiral, Mr. Van Voorthuizen, Mr. Van Dyke, Mrs. de Jong, Mrs. Boldno, Mr. Mollendijk. I learned how to pronounce Dutch names. We had to take Bible classes every semester at my high school, and it wasn't always a venue for robust theological exploration. For instance, we had Mr. Nimmer, one Bible teacher who seemed more inclined to try to scare the shit out of us than to teach us. One day he announced, "Did you know scientists dug a hole in the Soviet Union and recorded the sounds from hell? It's true." I don't think this had the intended effect. There was actually another Bible teacher we really loved. Mr. Byers was the young, cool teacher. One of my classmates asked one day, "Mr. Byers, what is heaven going to be like?" And after this weird moment in which he got this silly grin on his face, he said, "Heaven is going to be like an eternal orgasm." And then he blushed and realized what he had in a moment of unexpected honesty just said. And he added, "But you're not supposed to know what that is." When I was in ninth grade, Mr. Byers taught me another lesson about the danger that my sexuality posed. I want to be honest, I would never have described myself as gay when I was 14. I didn't really have the language or the understanding to do that. But I knew what I was feeling, and it scared me. Mr. Byers was the father of a 2-year-old son, and his wife worked at the school too, and she was pregnant. And then one day he stopped coming to school, and we were all pretty puzzled. Soon a special chapel was called, at which the entire high school was told by our super awkward principal that Mr. Byers was, quote, having a homosexual affair with another man. I don't remember our principal actually saying that. My friend Sean told me he said it exactly that way because he remembers it so clearly even now. He found it hysterical and absurd that our principal had to add "with another man." And with that, this teacher whom we had loved because he was the young and cool teacher who talked about orgasms vanished. We didn't see him at school anymore. We didn't see him at church anymore. He was disappeared. Is there any clearer way to say to a young, not out gay kid that his homosexuality will not only be a big deal, but potentially a deal breaker? Note that our principal did not say that Mr. Byers had been asked to leave because he broke his vows of marriage, because he had been unfaithful to his wife, because he had done something incredibly damaging to his family, because he had lied. This happened only because he was gay. This was the biggest of big deals. And I internalized that lesson. I felt it. And that's why I tried to have girlfriends. I almost proposed to one, but thank God we broke up and she found a nice Anglican priest to marry. That is why I begged God tearfully to make me straight, to take away these feelings, or at least to show me a way to dampen them. That's why I've thought so often over the years about killing myself. Because you know what takes away hope? Shame. Secrets. Hiding. Fear. Conversely, what builds hope is transparency, openness, light, sharing, and love. And all of these things are building blocks of community. Community, I think, has to be one of the pillars of hope. For various reasons, physical affection isn't the easiest thing for me. If you want to know more about why, you can go to my Facebook page and read a recent essay that I wrote. I can do things in writing that I can't do when I'm talking, and it's still hard for me to talk about some things publicly because what I write about is one of the darkest, most difficult episodes of my life. Plus, I am a huge introvert, and an Enneagram 6, if that means anything to you, you'll understand. Trusting people is very difficult for me, and I worry constantly about betrayal. Another thing that's hard for me, giving and receiving love. Over the past year, learning to say I love you to friends. Not eros, not sexual love, but philia and agape, affection and goodwill among friends. Deep and respectful and platonic and unconditional love has been one of the most remarkable, hard, and delightful things. I'm still working on the reciprocity because when they say to me, I love you, I'm still not sure I believe them. But as I've been working on this, as I've examined my own story and read other people's stories, I've seen the way in which isolation crushes hope. The sense that you must carry all the ever heavier baggage of life alone, this crushes hope. The feeling that nobody can understand your predicament, not in its entirety, this crushes hope. The teaching, intentional or not, that some aspect of you, some unchangeable aspect, some inborn trait may be a deal breaker and therefore must be hidden. This crushes hope. The idea that your place at the table the family table, the communion table, is conditional, this crushes hope. The notion that you are therefore somehow unwanted in community, a message many of us send all the time through signals spoken and unspoken, this crushes hope. So what do we do about it? We do something hard. We risk, we open ourselves up, we make ourselves vulnerable, and we dare. Last February, I went back to therapy for the first time in a long time. I am not by nature an oversharer, so I can't believe on some level that I'm telling you this. For the first few weeks, my therapist asked me, "Have you asked anyone for help this week?" Every single week, I would sit down and she would say the same thing. "Have you asked anyone for help this week?" And every single week, my answer was no. You know why? Because many reasons, and we don't have time to go into all of them. But here is the short version. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to give people any more reason than they already had to exclude me. I'd always been taught not to bother other people. It's a common cultural thing, especially among Asian Americans. Put your head down, don't cause trouble, work hard, be respectable. I'd always felt that to ask for help would somehow violate that to ask for help would in some sense make me a failure. I wish I could tell you that some switch was flipped one day when I suddenly realized how stupid all this was. It didn't, and it hasn't. Instead, it's happened slowly, and it still happens slowly, and I make progress, and I regress. It's more like a dimmer, really, than a switch. Some days the light burns into my darkness more brightly. Other days the darkness seems to win. I have to fight, especially as an introvert, to cultivate community, and in turn to cultivate hope. Sometimes it's super small things that represent breakthroughs. I know we like the big things, but sometimes it's the super small things that matter just as much, if not more. One day I texted a friend because sometimes it's easier for me to write things than to say them out loud. And I said, "Will you pray for me?" Another day I was nervous about giving a talk. I am always nervous before giving a talk. And beforehand I texted another friend and asked if he could just entertain me for a few minutes. And then another day I opened up to a friend over lunch about things I'd struggled with. And then I saw him again a few days later and I realized, oh, even after all of what spilled out of me, he is still my friend. Not long ago, I called my favorite college professor to ask her for a favor. We hadn't talked in months, and so I had a lot to update her on. At one point, I hadn't realized how long we'd been on the phone, and I apologized. And she stopped me, and she said, "Jeff, you are a blessing, not a burden." I didn't say anything because I was starting to cry, just like, no. She asked if I was still there, and I said yes. She knew what I was thinking, because then she said, "I need you to believe me. And I will keep saying it until you believe me. You are a blessing, not a burden." Can you believe that when someone says that to you? Or are the voices in your head, the isolating voices, the distracting and self-devaluing voices, the evil voices, too loud for you to hear it? Do you hear that message but dismiss it as quickly as I do? In insisting on saying it and saying it again, in receiving my stories and giving me that gift, my professor was building community. For just a moment, she gave me an infusion of hope. For many of us, such words are very hard to hear and to receive and to believe, just as much from other humans as from our good and gracious God. Do we believe it when God tells us, "You are a blessing, not a burden"? But such words, such life-giving words, are the very antidote to the fear and the isolation that eat away at hope. And those of us who are able to say those words, especially out loud or in a text message or in an email to other people, we need to do it. We need to fight the corrosion of hope And when our friends and loved ones aren't ready to hear them or understand them or accept them, we need to hold this truth and repeat this truth until they are. Imagine our inner lives as a farm. I'm coming around to the belief that hope is not best cultivated as a solo crop. It's not impossible. I won't argue that. But I think it grows best in an ecosystem, in relationship, in community. Or think of it another way. Building hope is like the night my friend Timothy and I spent on the banks of the Nile River in Uganda. We needed a break from the interviews, and so we went on safari. And the glorious stars were unspoiled by the earthly light. We could see the Milky Way. It's got all swirly. And Tim said to me, "Do you see the Southern Cross?" And I didn't at first, but then he pointed it out and traced some patterns in the sky, and then I saw it. And I said to Tim, "Do you see Orion?" And he didn't at first, but then I pointed it out and I traced some patterns in the sky, and he saw it. Sometimes we talk in church circles about how we were created for community. And what some people mean by that is that we were meant to be paired off. But if we look at Scripture, at the person and example of Jesus and the way he lived, and at the person and example of Paul and the way he lived, in those two stories, we see something different. We see difficult and arduous and challenging and multi-directional community, deep and spiritual friendship, real and candid companionship, agape and philia, sharing of life together, feeding against the worldly odds, wellsprings of hope. I have one last thought about community and hope. I'm a reporter and a writer. Most of the time, it may seem to you as if I do my work solo. It may also seem to you as if I know exactly what I am doing. Both of these could not be farther from the truth. My work as a reporter and a writer relies not only on the stories that other people are willing to give me, it's also done in conjunction with editors, whose names you will probably never learn. I have the help of friends who read and critique my manuscripts. I have the support of a husband who encourages me not to despair when I'm staring at my bank account or my blank screen. I have the assistance of the man in the coffee shop who makes my espresso every morning. These are the constructive voices who counterbalance the doubting and destructive ones, who tell me that this work can be done when my inner voice tells me it cannot. So many writers believe that we're not good at what we do, that the last sentence we wrote will be the one that reveals us finally to be charlatans. This work is inherently community work, in the construction, in the giving, and then, of course, in the receiving, because a writer's nothing without readers to take in their words and stories. And in that life cycle, through that community, I, as a writer, get a side benefit, that hope that carries me along. Slowly, I've come to realize that the otherworldly hope that Jesus provides overturns all of what we know to be true and wise, including my sense of order in this world. The otherworldly hope that Jesus teaches does not just focus on the marginalized. It changes the margins altogether, and it shuffles around the social order as we know it. The otherworldly hope that Jesus gave us in his life and his death and his resurrection, his ridiculously beautiful resurrection, says that it doesn't matter that the United States is dubbed by some a rich superpower and Uganda is dubbed by some a poor minnow. Because Jesus' math is different, and his value calculations are different, and his estimations of worth are radically different. This is otherworldly hope. That those who have been marginalized and dishonored, those who have had their God-given dignity unrecognized, those who have been deemed lesser than by society, find themselves at the center of an unfinished narrative of redemption. We, all of us in this room, every single one, enjoy immense privilege. We enjoy luxury. We enjoy comfort. So what are we doing to cultivate grace, to spread love, and to share otherworldly hope? Friends, if you count yourselves among the marginalized, if you see yourself as among those who have been undervalued, if you believe that your voice has gone unheard, I want to bring a special word of encouragement to you tonight. First, your story matters. Your presence here tells your story. Your presence in a difficult place and in a difficult world matters, and it speaks volumes. You are powerful testimony to resilience. And remember that you don't have to have it all figured out, because none of us do. But I want and need you to go further than that. I want and need you to do the hardest thing. I want and need you to extend the grace that has not been extended to you, and may never, in some cases, be extended to you. Because the otherworldly hope that you've been given is not just for you. And maybe part of your story, part of your powerful presence, part of your opportunity here is to be the love that you want to receive, and to be the grace that God has given to you, and to be the light that you want to shine for others, and to be the otherworldly hope that so many of us need. There will be times when other people have only the worst things to say, when the voices around you will send you back into what seems like the abyss. Never, ever allow yourselves to believe that you are alone. Never, ever forget that though we may seem far away, many of us are with you, holding you up in prayer. Never, ever forget that though you may not feel it at every second, we believe in a God who moves ahead of us, a Jesus who came down to stand alongside us, and a Holy Spirit who cleans up after us. Look to that God who makes you radiant and takes away all your shame. Look to that God and keep telling your stories. Look to that God and feel that divine and otherworldly hope. Look to that God who gives you the community and the grace and the humility you need to feed your hope. I want to end by returning to East Africa. After I left Uganda, I traveled to Kenya, where thousands of refugees like Rachel have fled from across the region over the years. It tells you something about the atmosphere, not just in Uganda, but also in Somalia and Ethiopia and Eritrea, that a country where it's not even safe to have an annual gay pride celebration becomes a safe haven for LGBTQ people. While I was in Nairobi, I met Ronald, who describes himself as a gender nonconforming person, neither male nor female. He grew up in a very Catholic family, was an altar boy, and helped with Mass almost every week. He's not sure that he identifies as Catholic anymore. The priests, the bishops, the cardinals, they said, "Let's pray to Mary," but they used that to attack us. I pray through God's Son, Jesus. They were using the saints to attack us. So I no longer believe in saints or in middlemen. Ronald fled to Kenya after suffering several physical attacks in Uganda. But that hasn't ended in Kenya. The paradigm there is so different from here. Skinny jeans, for instance, mark you out as queer. So when he was dressing to come meet me in the center of Nairobi, he had to borrow a pair of non-skinny trousers from his roommate. This is Africa, he told me. Someday, he says, he'd like to get married. Oh my God, I do want children, he said. Whatever God will give me. He seemed puzzled that I'm married and in my 30s and yet have no children and don't know if I ever will. Everyone would like to have as many as you can, he said. I would have as many as I can if the money's there. And here's the miraculous thing to me. Listen to the words of this part of his testimony. I believe God is the creator and that God is everything. God wants me to serve him and follow his commandments. The most important commandment, to love each other. I'm getting used to praying alone. I'm not angry with God, but I am angry at most of his followers and the preachers. I'm only angry at his people. People preach things that are not in the Bible. What will happen now for me? The question is not clear. My life is not secure here. One day recently, he and his roommates were hauled in by the police, even though they were actually being attacked. They were not the attackers. In Africa, we have a saying, he told me. A thief has 40 days. Meaning, on the 40th day, if you're a thief, you'll be dead. The police said to him, this is your 39th day. When I pray, Ronald told me, I thank God for my life. I don't ask God for a lot because he's already given me so much. I have seen each and everything. People have attacked me, wanting to take my life. I have tasted death. Most people fear death, but I've tasted it. I am not afraid of it anymore. I have suffered, but God has saved me. If it wasn't for him, I would be dead. Jesus suffered too, but at the end, he was the winner. I face many challenges, but I feel hopeful. This, my friends, is otherworldly hope. That amid great pain, Ronald can focus on these bigger truths and our big God. This is otherworldly hope, a divine gift and a promise of transformation. This is otherworldly hope, forged in grace and secured in the recognition of that grace. And this is otherworldly hope, that we are amid community, which on our better days we choose to acknowledge and embrace. Can I confess to you that I don't feel it every day? I think you probably figured that out. I don't feel it. Just the other day, I was sitting in my coffee shop writing, or more accurately, pretending to write, while I felt despair, which some might say is the precise opposite of hope. Often, hope feels more like aspiration than reality to me. Often, this world clouds my vision. It makes us feel worthless and less than and ugly and beyond redemption and beyond hope. But I want to make you a promise. When you don't feel it and when you don't sense it, I will hold on to hope for you and try to remind you of it and nudge you toward it and nurture it until you're ready to hold it yourself again. And I hope you'll do the same for me. Thank you.
If you have questions for Jeff, please write them on a card, and they'll be collected, I think, by ushers, and Julia will bring them to me. Thank you. I've read about 2/3 of your book. I haven't finished yet. It's a beautiful book. Read the book. Does listening to others, does hearing the stories of the people that you speak with, does that make it easier for you to offer grace?
I think it has. I think I went into the reporting with such stereotypes and prejudices. I want to be honest about that. So, for instance, when I visited Westboro Baptist Church, how do we not have stereotypes
Sure.
based on the God hates fags signs, right? But then when you go and you sit in church with people and you have dinner with people and you are at home with people, you see other layers and you see other sides. And that makes it a lot harder for me to hate. I think that for me was one of the most powerful experiences, is realizing that the Phelps family, who make up the vast majority of that church, are human beings. We got to know them. I didn't go by myself. I went with my friends Tim and Dana, and we got to know them pretty well, and they got to like us pretty well. They told me at one point that they had created a God hates the Chinese sign just for me. And here's the logic, okay? I was actually very honored, because here's the logic, and a lot of people don't get this about Westboro. They believe that they are the last faithful church in the world. And the world is going to end soon, but they don't know who the last few lost sheep is that God has asked them to track down. So it could be me.
And if they can get through to you through a
Exactly.
sign, maybe you'll change and not be Chinese.
It may be you, it may be me. And
Yeah.
and I said, but the world sees these signs as so hateful. And they said, we're Calvinists. That hits a little close to home, doesn't it? We're Calvinists, and we believe that God has chosen who's going to heaven. And if you've been given the eyes to see, you'll read those signs differently than anyone else. Of course the world rejects them. If you are chosen, you will see the love. And if you stop and you back up and you let go of the stereotypes and you think about it, it's like, okay, I don't necessarily agree, but you start to get it a little bit, right? And so that helped feed my grace. It helped feed my grace when they came to New York for the first day of gay marriage, and they had time on their schedule, and I said, hey, do you want to have lunch? And so we went to lunch, and we went for dim sum, and it really humanizes someone to me as a Chinese person to see white people fumbling with
Fussing
chopsticks. You know, so it's like, okay. And they were so thoughtful. So here's one example of how they were thoughtful. So for their protest, they wear special T-shirts, right? God hates fags. And before lunch, they had brought other T-shirts to cover those up, you know, because they didn't want to be in this Chinese restaurant and make a scene or anything. So like one woman had this Piglet T-shirt, and behind Piglet you saw God hates fags. But they're human, and we talked about life and kids and marriage and weddings, and yeah, stories help. Personal interaction helps. I can't read about the Phelpses and see the vitriol that's written about them now and react the same way that I did before.
I know for me, and I want to say that I appreciate the fact that as you talk about feeling excluded, you go well beyond exclusion on the basis of sexuality. Because I'm assuming that everybody in this room resonated with at least one thing you had to say at that moment. So yeah, it has always seemed to me that it's hard to maintain stereotypes if I'm honestly listening to someone tell a story. Do you think there's any chance then that you may have in some ways changed the hearts of some of the Phelpses by being with them, that they might have heard you?
I mean, I don't think I can take much credit. I will tell you that a year and a half after we visited, I had an unexpected house guest at my house, and that was Megan Phelps Roper, who got the church onto social media. And she stayed in touch with me and with Tim and Dana, and also with some folks she met on Twitter. And slowly through our conversations, she started to think about how we weren't as evil as she'd been taught. And maybe she even liked us a little bit, even though she wasn't supposed to. And so she and her sister Grace left the church. Yeah. So when Megan came to New York, she said, can I come stay with you? And I said, let me talk to my husband about that. But he said, okay, it might be kind of weird, and it was weird, but I think, I like to think that relationship matters, right? And that by showing her that we could be community to her as well, there were options for her life, there were choices that she could make that would not be the same as the ones that she'd been presented all her life.
And I respect the idea that, so, I mean, I think we have to concede that there are people, and the Phelpses in some way are among them, that believe that if I believe you are sinning and I love you, I need to call you out. I think that's problematic when there is no relationship, right?
Right.
Let me go to this question then from the audience. Do you want people who believe homosexual marriage is a sin to attend the weddings of gay people they love? Do you think they can be true to their convictions in doing so? If they truly love the gay person, and they believe they shouldn't go, is there a way to be less hurtful? In other words, how do you negotiate loving a person if you believe they're making a wrong choice?
Look, I can't tell anyone what to do, right? When I got married, I had friends who wrote me and said, we're happy that you are happy. We can't, for theological reasons, attend the wedding, but we wish you well. My mother said that she couldn't. My father didn't say anything, so his view was made known in that way. I would never want my friends to do anything that they felt put them in poorer standing with God. If my wedding is going to be a spiritual obstacle to you, by all means, do what you need to do to feel close to God. I think we define love in such radically different ways in this country, and in some ways, I think Greek is better than English because there are these different words for love. Right? We lump all these things together, and sometimes when we talk about love, we're not actually talking about the same thing. I feel like you need to let the Holy Spirit guide you, and you also need to let the Holy Spirit guide me. And maybe the Spirit moves in us in different ways at different times, and we have to have the humility to acknowledge that. That's probably one of the most difficult things I have found. Just yesterday, I had people preaching at me on Facebook, total strangers, quoting Bible verses, and they thought that was an extremely loving thing for them to do. And the hardest thing for me to do is to receive that as loving, right? But when I step back and I remove my feelings from the situation, I can see, okay, that's what they're trying to do. And then for my own sake, I have to say, I don't know who you are. I'm going away. Mm-hmm. So we have to make choices for ourselves sometimes, and I think we also have to acknowledge that others' relationships with God are their relationships with God. We don't know what's going on in someone else's heart.
The key word there still is humility.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
There's a great poem by Miller Williams, who's Lucinda Williams' father, called Compassion. And my favorite part of it is where he talks about we don't know what wars are going on down where the spirit meets the bone. And I ever since I read that poem, I've tried to remember that, because you walk past someone in the hall, you go to McDonald's and the cashier is grumpy. You don't know what's going on deep down. And I, on my better days, all 2 of them a year, I try to remember that.
I do feel like it would be easier if everyone oriented their moods around my needs.
Oh, always.
Right?
Always.
How do you combat fear you might have while doing your work, speaking and writing? You've talked about some of the personal fears, but even...
I'll let you know when I figure that out. It's really hard. Yeah. I've been struggling with a story that I've been working on for months. And my editor keeps emailing me saying, when's that draft coming in? And I keep saying, a couple more days. And some days I just don't know. The voices are in your head, and all my usual tricks don't work. So often I listen to music, and there are certain things that work usually really well, and then some days they don't. So sometimes I go for a walk. As a writer, one of the really helpful things for me at some moments has been to read really good writing. So I will take a break from my own writing and read writing that makes me think, oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. That is how I want to write. And that doesn't mean I kind of mimic, but it gets me into a kind of headspace where maybe I'm thinking in a more fluid way and thinking more creatively.
Let me continue the English major moment then. You said, as you were talking, that sometimes you can write things that you can't say. How do you... I find that fascinating, because I have so many students who can say things they can't write. Right?
Present company hands. Excluded, no, I'm sure.
I mean, I sometimes I'm that person, right? So was that something you discovered early on, and is that part of why you were a writer? Or was it something that
So I think,
developed over time?
Some of this might be a function of the way Chinese children are reared. So growing up, you're taught never to speak in the presence of your elders unless you're asked a question. And that's something that I've really internalized. When I was growing up, we would go to family dinners and we would sit down and my mom would pull out paper and a pen and I would sit and draw and write. And if someone asked me a question, sometimes I would be allowed to answer and sometimes I wouldn't. So last year we were in Hong Kong for a family thing, and I am 30-something, and I'm sitting there at a table with my parents and family friends who knew that I hadn't been back to Hong Kong for a little while, and they said, "Oh, what do you want to eat?" And I was about to answer, and my mom cuts me off and was like, "He eats everything." I am 30. I was almost going to swear. I was 30. I'm 30-something years old, and my mom is answering for me like I'm 5. And that's a reflection of a culture in which you are not supposed to have a voice. So then, you plunk me in American culture where everybody's so loud, and I'm just like, what? Can you hear me? Hello? And I think that's why writing has always been safer. I don't have to try to fight for attention. I don't have to try to be louder than other people. I can't yell as loud. And it's safer also, because I don't have to look at anyone. I don't have to have that immediate fear. It's more like it's gonna come fear than an immediate fear, right? They can judge me later when I'm done with the piece.
So that's interesting too, because your name is on this stuff, and you alluded to, and I'm only vaguely aware there's been some ugly talk on Yik Yak around here, and that we have partially this culture of anonymity where you can write anything you want and with any name you want to put on it. So what I hear you saying is that you as an individual are kind of empowered by being able to present this with your own voice, with your own authorship, but not have to make eye contact or...
I think there's a kind of buffer zone that provides some safety.
Yeah.
What I will say, and I do want to address this Yik Yak thing.
For those of you who don't know, and I don't have a smartphone, so I don't see Yik Yak, but it's a sort of texting or chat thing that allows people to make anonymous if they want to comments, and it's sort of localized. So there's a campus, I guess, campus community on which there has been some...
I would raise the question, I was spending some time before I came here on the Calvin webpage reading about the principles with which you are supposed to be building community. Between that and what Jesus teaches us about how to treat each other, I would wonder if a single person on this campus should even be on Yik Yak. What would you say anonymously that you would not be willing to put your name to? It should not be said.
Yeah.
And if Yik Yak is where you have to say it, you should keep that in your journal or nowhere at all. And I question whether that has any place at all in a community that even comes close to approaching the name of Jesus.
Thank you, I agree.
You don't have a smartphone.
No. But, and I could go to other places here. I could talk about course evaluations and such, and how do we, I don't mean that as a dig, but how can we cultivate a culture of courage and trust that allows us to put our names on our words without fear of reprisal or being willing to receive the reprisal, right? To know that matters as much. There's a question here about how often do you read the Bible, and how do you encounter the passages that address sexuality?
So it's so fascinating to me.
Because that's a really simple question.
It's easy. It's fascinating to me that everywhere I go, people want to know how I interpret those passages. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a failure of the imagination in that question. You don't really care how I interpret those passages. You know how I interpret those passages because I am married to a man. So I will answer that question this way. There is not a single person in this room or on this planet who interprets the Bible 100% correctly. What is the manner with which we approach Scripture? What is the attitude with which we approach it? What is the heart with which we approach God's Word? God knows that. God knows the spirit in which we open the Bible. And He knows that all of us are going to make mistakes when we read those words. And I believe His grace covers the mistakes that every single one of us makes every time we open the Bible. And honestly, if His grace is not big enough to cover our mistakes, whether on those passages that you're so obsessed with or on others that others are so obsessed with, if His grace is not big enough to cover that, I'm not sure I believe in that God. So I read the Bible in various forms all the time. Sometimes I read it in song because it inspires so much culture. Sometimes I actually sit there and read it. I just ordered a few months ago this version of the Bible that I'm super excited about called Biblioteca that removes chapter and verse.
Oh.
So you can read it more like literature. And I'm super excited about that, partly because I'm also a kind of design geek, and this font designer designed special fonts for it, and it looks pretty. Some Bibles are so ugly. So that's how I would answer the scripture question.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to read this word for word, this from an alum. Sometimes the line blurs for me between my ability to show mercy and feeling like I'm allowing myself to be mistreated or neglecting to care for myself by guarding my heart. What do you say to the limits of human mercy?
What do I say to the limits of human mercy? There are lots of limits to human mercy, and we see them every day. I think it's hard, right? There's this constant tension, this constant struggle between selfishness and openness to the world. And in some ways, I find it very inspirational that Pope Francis has called for a year of mercy. We should be living lifetimes of mercy, but it's a reflection of the state of our world that we need a year of it. And of course, Protestants are like, whatever that guy in Rome says. But I think there's something to be learned from that. I think American culture, especially for those of us who are active on social media, is incredibly lacking in mercy. Twitter is not a place that honors mercy. Twitter is not a place that celebrates mercy. And I think it's a minute-by-minute struggle. Mercy and its close sibling grace, right? How do you have one without the other? I don't think you do.
Do you ever feel, again, as I hear you talk about the Phelps family, and you're extending a grace that I cannot feel, and I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but do you ever feel that you're extending that mercy again at the cost of your own well-being?
Not yet. I will say this, okay? Sometimes people say to me, you sound so gracious. I kind of have like a 10-second delay in my head, and what you hear is not everything that's going on in here. And I think in some sense that's something that I've learned as I've had to do more public speaking, which is not something that I ever knew I would have to do when I went into journalism. And I think that has served me well in the rest of my life, because that delay, the time that I'm taking to formulate a thought before I spew it at you, has been an incredibly helpful editing period. And I just, it's been healthy for me. It's one of the few things I do that's healthy.
I think I should try that. Not right now, but tomorrow. And
yeah, if you're in her class, report back.
Yes, let me know, yes. Maybe we'll end with this question. How has writing, being a journalist, helped you learn to hope?
It gets me out of my own head. I think it's more the reporting than the writing. So reporting is about meeting other people, which as an introvert, it's usually very difficult for me to do. A cocktail party is my idea of hell. If there is a hell, it looks to me like a cocktail party. And for some reason, when I put my reporter hat on, maybe it's a control thing, like I can control the interview in some form. It's empowering. And to hear someone else's story, to have to set aside my own biases. Because if I'm going to tell an accurate and fair story, I have to set aside as many of my preconditions and as many of my whatever I think I know as I can. I have to try to put myself as much as is possible in the position of the person who's telling me the story. And that has been incredibly helpful. As you may have guessed from what I had to say to you tonight, I'm in my head a lot, and I need to spend less time there. And I think many of us who are introverts spend probably too much time in our own heads. And so reporting has been a way for me to gain empathy, to learn that there are so many stories other than my own. And it's a mystery to me how God weaves them all together, or or just lets them be, and how does this all make sense in the end? I don't know. But to be able to explore these various strands and to be introduced to new countries and new cultures and new ways of looking at the world, let me tell you a little anecdote from Uganda. You all, regardless of how you feel about gay marriage, I'm sure read all the articles when the Supreme Court made their decision, and you have some, I think, from pop culture and media, some understanding of what it looks like. And when I got to Uganda, they saw my wedding ring, so they automatically assumed that I was straight. So the first question most people asked, including LGBT people, was, how many children do you have? Because if you've got a ring, you've got kids. And I said, I don't have any kids. Oh. And I said, I don't have a wife. Oh. And even the LGBT people were shocked. And so I said, yeah, how long have you been married? The usual questions. And then they would say, every single time, oh, but you're the wife. And I was like, no, there's no wife. No, but you're the wife, right? And I was like, no, there's no wife. Like, it's two husbands. And then they'd say, so who does the cooking? And I said, I do most of the cooking. Yeah, so you're the wife. I was like, no, but like my husband does most of the cleaning and the decorating. Oh. So maybe he's more the wife? And it was so interesting to me to be forced to step out of my paradigm and think, wow, even LGBT people have no concept of how this gay marriage thing works. And every couple that we met in Uganda, gay couples would define, oh, and this is the wife, and this is the husband. Like two women would say, this is the husband, and this is the wife. And I was like, oh, wow, it works so differently here. And what do? Do I judge and be like, oh, you're using the wrong words? Well, you can use whatever words you want. In some ways, it was a different dialect of English, and who am I to impose my dialect on them? Mm-hmm. So it's experiences like that just kind of force me out of the easy way of thinking that I have in my normal life.
Well, I want to say thank you for listening to those stories and bringing them to us with so much grace. Thank you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks.
Are you willing to talk with individuals afterwards? Okay. If any of you would like to speak with Jeff, he'll be up here afterwards for just a little while. So, thanks again.